Hi, my name is Holly West, and I'm the author of the Mistress of Fortune Historical Mystery Series, among many other things. And I also edited Murder a Go-Go's, crime fiction inspired by the music of the Go-Go's. I'm here today with Richie Narvaez. He's a writer whose career includes magazine publishing, teaching, short stories, and novels. His young adult mystery, Holly Hernandez and the Death of Disco, won the Agatha and Anthony Awards in 2021, and his most recent publication is a collection of short fiction called NOIRYORICAN. Welcome, Richie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Holly. This is an honor to be on this show. I was really happy that you asked me.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. First, congratulations on your Agatha and Anthony Award wins. Was that the first time that you were nominated?
It's the first time I was nominated for either of those awards. I don't know if you saw the videos on it, but I was actually quite flabbergasted both times when they said my name. I had to do a mental beat to say, wait, that was my name, right? It was really emotional both times. It really kind of hit me.
We've got a lot to cover today. Let's start with Holly Hernandez, because that's probably what we'll talk most about. Tell us a little bit more about the book.
Holly Hernandez and the Death of Disco is a young adult thriller. The book is about a young Puerto Rican Nancy Drew, who is the daughter of a police detective, and this, in this case, a woman police detective who has to deal with her own issues in 1979. And there is a murder at her elite high school in Brooklyn, and she decides to solve it, even though, of course, nobody wants her to solve it. At the same time, the book works in alternating points of view. She has a rival named Xander Herrera, who's also quite a smart student, very intelligent, but is super antisocial, whereas she is perky. They are opposites. And he dislikes her immediately. But when he gets accused of a crime, she realizes she has to solve the crime to prove he's innocent. And he, of course, resents this completely. And he decides, well, I'm going to solve it myself. And so there's these rival investigations going on. And of course, they meet later on without telling too much. But it was a joy to write. It is my first YA book, but not my first YA story. I had written a short story years ago for an anthology for Latinx teenagers. And it was, when I was trying to come up with an idea, I was like, is there a Puerto Rican Nancy Drew? Because if there isn't, I have an idea. And I looked and there didn't seem to be. And I was like, well, this is a perfect opportunity. One of the things we do in crime fiction is we take tropes and we do something new with them. That's because a lot of the tropes are the same, and we twist them and put a new place. How many times has Sherlock Holmes, as that kind of character, has just been, let's put him in medieval Japan. Let's put him in Mars. Let's do something new with them. It's just like, I don't know. It's like when you make meatloaf every night. After a while, like, it's meatloaf again. Yeah, but this time it has falafel seasoning. So it's a little bit more interesting. Sherlock Holmes is a great character, but let's say if you make him African-American, or if you make him a woman, that gives him a different subtext. And it gives that story just a little bit more interest because it's been around so long and now we can twist it. So I was like, well, Nancy Drew, she's been around, but let's see a Puerto Rican one in Brooklyn, a nice urban setting. So I wrote a short story. It was contemporary. And one of the issues I had was I don't have kids, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews. So I was trying to figure out how much of the modern slang should I put in, which is, I think, always an issue for YA writers. And I couldn't really put much in. So, but the story came out well, and people liked it. And so the publisher said, if you ever want to write a book, write a book. So I was like, all right, let me try this. I wasn't really, honestly, I wasn't a fan of YA, but I think, well, what the hell, they're going to pay me. So I wanted to give it a shot. And actually, I was interested in trying something different. I think sometimes when I write a lot of noir, as you were saying, you write noir, you can paint yourself into a corner. Yeah. And I thought this was an interesting experiment. The book takes place in 1979. Unlike the short story, I was trying to ask myself, can I write a whole book about teenagers? And when I'm not a teenager anymore, and it's hard to understand a modern teenager. And there's also, of course, with any modern mystery, is the cell phone is that thing that can mess up an entire plot well, why don't you just use your cell phone? So I said, you know how I can solve this? She's 14 years old. The last time I was 14 was in 1979. Let's just put the whole thing back in 1979. And that opened up so many possibilities. 1979 is a critical year in history. The world changes tremendously. Reagan wins at the end of that year. That's your whole neoliberalism starts marching through and changing the whole world. Disco is in the pop culture is gigantic at this point. There was so much material around the idea of disco and what disco meant to disenfranchised, marginalized, whatever you want to call them, people who were not in the mainstream. It was made for them and by them. And it was the stuff that you went to the little dinky clubs off the beaten path, private places for African Americans, for Latinos, for LGBTQ community. And it was their music. And it only gets popularized and commercialized the way anything cool eventually does in this country. I mean, like the hip hop, they started doing McDonald's commercials, anything. It just gets thinned out. That's one of the reasons people hated disco. But also, it was something representative of those marginalized people. As I was doing this book, I looked up the history of disco quite a bit. And I would go to YouTube or Spotify, whatever, and find all these disco collections and find that, wow, you know, there's this stuff that was surfaced to us, all the pop stuff, but there's all these other great songs. And, you know, the pop stuff can sound a lot of the same. And I can see with some people, like, it's all, you know, sort of manufactured music, but there's some beautiful, really entrancing, great music in disco. So, and by the way, even though the title of the book is Death of Disco, and a lot of people were saying disco died, it never really dies. It just sort of transforms, as all music, it just transforms into something else. I mean, your modern rock is basically dance rock, which is just incorporating elements of disco into that. And then there's so much of that electro synth music that we get in the 80s. That's just an evolution of disco. So it never really dies. It evolves. And then some people still do pure disco songs.
You touched on your teenage years and you set the book there because you thought I can relate to that more than I can relate to modern teenagers. I would do the same thing. But in terms of like details, how similar to your upbringing was it?
Well, actually, there's some details that are really accurate to or close to my upbringing. Xander lives in Williamsburg area where I grew up. I went to an elite high school. I went to Brooklyn Technical High School. I changed the name here to Flatbush Tech so I could have more freedom in writing about it. Though it's very similar. The hallways are described the same way. The gym is very similar. There was an SOS squad of these soldier-like students in the hallway who told you the correct way to walk down the hallway. But at that point, the details change. Oh, and Xander's riding the bus. That actually is really close to me. That like idea of having to get in the bus and being upset with the whole MTA. Holly Hernandez, I created her from an idea, maybe an idealization a little bit of what I wanted to be, like super smart and popular and also perky. And I was none of those things. I was basically a sour 14-year-old. I didn't stand out much at all. And so she's created from imagining what I wanted her to kind of be the archetypal teen detective that we see a lot. And I wanted her because I wanted that for the Puerto Rican community. But at the same time, I wanted somebody who was a little closer to me to counterpoint that. And I think that's part of my noir heart coming through a little bit. So Xander Herrera comes in and he's not perky at all. He dreams of being some sort of supervillain, though he's not. He's got a lot of emotional things going on, and that's not coming from my background. He's got a different kind of household, but I felt a lot for him. I will tell you, Xander's based on two people, these two guys I knew from the neighborhood, one from school, one from the neighborhood in Williamsburg. In Brooklyn Tech, there was this big guy, and he had a ginger afro that was huge, and he was odd looking, and everybody made fun of him. I did not make fun of him. I did not interact with him. I don't think I was not part of the cool crowd, but I saw him being picked on. And the thing is, at the same time, he could give as well as he got. and he had a smart mouth, and his name was Xander. And I was briefly attached to the Boy Scouts when I was younger. I was with them, and there was a guy there who was very similar. He had the Coke bottle glasses, horrible acne, really bad braces that and an open mouth, so you always see them, and picked on all the time. And the thing is, but both these guys, I never really got to interact with them very much, but they were always sort of in my sphere. But I understood that they could not hide. They were the kind of people that walked around with targets on their backs. And I thought that that would be an interesting person to have in this book as a counterpoint to Holly's popularity. Well, so he comes from something very concrete, where Holly is sort of a tradition in crime fiction.
Well, you were talking about Xander, and even though he's much less likable than Holly is, he really, from the very beginning, really pulled at my heartstrings. And it made me wonder, and it's that over-the-top arrogance that makes him so dislikable, which is his defense mechanism. And underneath, he's extremely vulnerable. It made me wonder, was it difficult for you emotionally to tap into his headspace?
Not the part where he's in school and being sarcastic. That's kind of like wish fulfillment, I think, for a lot of teenagers, which is another reason why he's actually quite popular with a lot of the readers when they react to me. But when he's at home, the parts when he's at home are not exactly my upbringing, but are resonant of it. Enough that, there's a part where his mother comes to visit that was heartbreaking to do. And there's a part later on in the disco, which was tough to write, but it was like, this is what would happen. So there are things about Xander that are very close to home.
This piggybacks on the previous question, is whether writing about teenagers, since you really hadn't done it much before, was there anything about getting into that headspace that helped you come to terms with or understand yourself better? Because, it brought back aspects of your own upbringing. I
was asked when I did my first book, it was the Hipster Deathrattle, and then it had to do with gentrification in Williamsburg. And I wrote it because I was there when the neighborhood, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, was being gentrified. And it had created so much anger inside me that I had to do something. And it eventually coalesced into the book. And I was asked when I launched the book at the book launch, did it help make you feel better? And I was like, honestly, no. But it did help me put my arms around it, my head around the idea. The pain is still there, but I understand it better. I understand what was possible for me to do, what is still possible for me to do in terms of gentrification with with adolescence. I'm sure some people with years of good therapy, you get past some of the pain. Writing the book did help me look back at a past I didn't look at very often. There are stories still to tell about that.
Jess Lurie has a book called Rewrite Your Life. And the concept behind it is that you can rework some of the events and things that have happened in your life, the pain that you've experienced, and channel it into your writing. So the whole experience is more vibrant. It's almost like being very self-serving with your own pain. I teach creative writing. This is what I try to tell my students. This is like, look, this can be like therapy for you. You are the master of this domain. You can create these characters, whether or not they're all going to be a little bit a piece of you, one character probably more than the other. And this is a time for you sometimes, if you're struggling how to get ideas, think about things that happen to you, and you don't have to get at it directly, but when you get it done, you're going to find there's going to be something you understand about yourself a little bit more. Right. And you're going back to Hipster Deathrattle, that is kind of dark humor, but it had a higher purpose. Even if it was just to teach you how you can maybe help the situation. The concept for Hipster Deathrattle, or the idea of writing a book, came to me in 1999, where I was still thinking about, I have to do something about gentrification. This is an important issue to me. And I was a journalism student, and I believed in, if you write about something and you bring people's attention to it, damn it, you're going to make a change. But I couldn't do it. It was so close. It was too close to home. Everything I wrote was a rant
or Screed, you know? It's only when crime fiction comes into my life about 5 or 6 years later, where I was like, I can use this as a template. And this is a wonderful thing about crime fiction. It gives you the thing that a lot of people struggle with in writing is plot, how to move from one scene to another. This is why so many people, I think, abandon writing. I don't know what happens in the next scene. If you can write a crime fiction story, and if you understand how it's put together, even if it's as cliche as all get out, to use a cliche, you will be able to understand this is the frame. Now, once you see that, then you can try to change the frame. I had talked to David Haskey Wombly-Wyden about this and teaching creative writing. A lot of times in creative writing classes, they go straight to James Joyce or somebody of that caliber, and they say, we're going to look at James Joyce's The Lovely Language. Okay, now you write a story. And the thing is, when you're starting out, that's like saying, okay, now become Picasso. Just do something brilliant. And the thing is, I think we need to think smaller and to see the seams. And the wonderful thing about crime fiction is we can see the seams quite often. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Learning how to write plot is really important for the beginning writer. And for me, it helped to be able to get at this social justice issue and frame it, because otherwise it was a mess. It wasn't going anywhere. Now, and it gave me a frame, and that became Hipster Deathrattle.
Your most recent short story appears in Midnight Hour, a chilling anthology of crime fiction from 20 authors of color. Tell us about your contribution.
This book was conceived by members of the organization Crime Writers of Color to try to do an anthology with crime writers of color exclusively so that they could be represented and to show all their voices together. So we batted the idea back and forth, what the premise would be. Midnight Hour sounded sexy. All those stories had to be midnight themed. And one of the things that intrigues me as a Puerto Rican is how Puerto Ricans have been portrayed in pop culture. And one of the primary things, if you ask most people, when they say Puerto Ricans in pop culture, will be West Side Story. Like, that is how we were represented for years. Now, there's a lot of issues with West Side Story, and I know some Puerto Ricans hate that movie. But in that idea of a zeitgeist, or the idea of Puerto Ricans to many people, that's what we were represented as. So I wanted to play with that. I love going after those things. In a sense, they were appropriated, and I wanted to appropriate it back. So there's a line in West Side Story where they say, let's meet at Doc's at midnight. If you know the movie, Doc's is the soda shop where they meet to have the war council before the big gang fight. And the thing is, I have always been intrigued by the character Chino. And in fact, the character from Hipster Deathrattle is side named after him as one of his nicknames. Chino's kind of wasted in West Side Story. He's got almost nothing to do. He's there just to moon for Maria and then kill Tony, spoilers, and then get carried away. That means taken away by the cops. And I was like, now, he didn't die. Years later, where is Chino? And the story's set in the 1990s, because we still have the World Trade Center to back. Where is Chino in 1995? Where is Maria? Because she's still alive. And what if they met? So that's the basis of the story. And of course, it has to be a crime element. So I figured, look, Maria's probably prospered. She probably, knowing her, she's like, you know what? The hell with this gang stuff. I'm going to marry a doctor and move on out. So she becomes rich. But Chino, because he had to go to the pokey, has had not such a good life. So they meet where they originally met at Lincoln Center. San Juan Hill is where West Side Story is set. San Juan Hill is an area of the west side of Manhattan that was all tenements. But in the 50s, it was eminent domained out. They just decided to take all those slums out, and they created Lincoln Center from that. So I thought it was kind of ironic and sad that he still worked there, and then she comes to see an opera. So yeah, that's the genesis of the story.
I never actually have ever seen that movie.
Really?
I know the story
wow.
because
Okay.
it's such a piece of pop culture. You introduced some LGBTQA themes as well,
Yeah.
which I've noticed in some of your other short stories. I thought your retelling or your reimagination of what could have transpired years later I think it was really well done, and I enjoyed it. So you talk about the 5 a.m. Writers Club on Twitter, and I'm always jealous because you're 3 hours ahead of me. And by the time, even if I get up early, I've missed 5 a.m. Writers Club. But is that when you get most of your writing done?
You know, I could lie and say, oh my God, Holly, yes. I churn out at least 1,200 words a morning. And then I have my coffee. And then I go back and I churn out another 1,200 words. What it ends up being is it's sort of my social media space where I will, here, let me knock on my social media for the day. Let me find a picture for Instagram, do a couple of tweets, retweet people, because frankly, this is part of our job now. We have to become social media mavens, though many of us don't like it. We have to go on TikTok. We have to make videos of ourselves. We have to be current with the hashtags.
We have to go on YouTube and do interviews with authors.
Exactly.
It's excruciating.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, part of it is fun. It's always like, oh my God, I could be writing. But, you know, honestly, a lot of us love the procrastination anyway. And that's what it becomes a little bit. It becomes a little procrastination. What I do end up doing, it's a good editing time for me. So I will take whatever I scribbled, and I usually end up writing a lot in the afternoons, actually. But I can take whatever I wrote in the afternoon, and then in the morning, I'm like, okay, that's garbage. It gets out. And then I'll do a little bit of that so that it feels productive. It's a tough business. And I like the thing about the 5 a.m. Writers Club that I like the best is the community. The silly little gifts that I post and that other people post, the donuts on Friday. It's just like, okay, I see you over there. I know what you're doing. You're trying to write, and I'm over here and I'm trying to write. And we're all across different countries, some of us, and across time zones. And yeah, we're just trying to work this bizarre business where most of us will not end up rich or successful in any, tangible way. This craft is a demon. It's an addiction. It's a curse.
It's therapy.
It's
how we work through things that otherwise might not get worked through, even if we're not writing specifically about those things. This has been a really interesting conversation, but I knew going into it from previous experience that the conversation meanders here and there, and that's the joy of doing these. So you never know what you're really going to end up talking about. So I think we had a great conversation.
Oh, this was so much fun, and we got into some deeper things that I thought we were going to, but it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for asking me to do this. It was great.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I wanted to get to know you better. I was looking forward to meeting you in person in New Orleans. So I hope that I can do that in Minneapolis. And in the meantime, we'll see each other online.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you. This is great. Yeah. And I'll see you in Minneapolis and I'll buy you a drink.
I will drink it. Anyway, if you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel to see new content as soon as it's released. I will see you next time with another great interview.